There are voices you admire, and then there are voices that feel like they arrived by mistake, as if the world was never built to hold them. Minnie Riperton had one of those voices, a voice so light it felt untethered, so high it seemed to float above language itself. 5 octaves of sound, stretching past the limits of the human body. A whistle register so pure it did not sound trained. It sounded unreal. But the tragedy of Minnie Riperton is not that she could sing higher than almost anyone who came before her. The tragedy is that a voice this rare was carried by a life that would be cut brutally short. This is not a story that begins with applause. It begins with absence. Because when most people truly heard Minnie Riperton, when her voice finally reached millions of homes and radios, she was already dying. The world fell in love with her sound at the exact moment her body began to betray her, and she never told them. Minnie Riperton was never chasing fame. She did not hunger for spotlight. She did not perform to be seen. She sang because sound was the only place she felt completely free. Before Lovin You, before the charts, before the platinum records and television appearances, there was a little girl on the south side of Chicago, singing quietly to herself, not because anyone was listening, but because singing felt like breathing. Her voice moved effortlessly between worlds, opera and soul, structure and instinct, innocence and ache. People who encountered her never forgot her. Denzel Washington once said her album Perfect Angel saved him during one of the darkest periods of his life. Pam Grier said if she ever had a daughter, she would name her Minnie. Mariah Carey would later credit her as one of her greatest influences, especially for opening the door to a kind of singing few believed was even possible. But none of them spoke only about her voice. They spoke about her gentleness, her calm, her quiet strength, because Minnie Riperton carried something far heavier than talent. She carried truth, and she carried it alone. At the height of her success, when radio stations played her voice endlessly, when audiences finally recognized what musicians had known for years, Minnie Riperton was making a private decision that would define her legacy. She chose not to be pitied, not to be reduced to illness, not to let fear become the loudest thing about her life. She chose love. She chose honesty, carefully measured. She chose music over explanation. This is not the story of a fragile angel. It is the story of a woman who understood that beauty does not need to shout, and courage does not need an audience. Minnie Riperton was born on the 8th of November 1947 in Chicago, Illinois, and raised on the South Side in the Bronzeville neighborhood, a place shaped by segregation, resilience, and extraordinary creativity. Bronzeville did not offer safety. It offered sound. Nat King Cole, Sam Cooke, Dinah Washington, Quincy Jones, Herbie Hancock. Music was not decoration there. It was survival. Minnie was the youngest of 8 children in a working-class household. Her mother stayed home, turning scarcity into order. Her father worked long hours as a railroad porter, an invisible job that held the country together while offering little in return. Money was tight, but discipline was absolute. From the beginning, Minnie did not simply sing. She listened. As a toddler, she made up melodies while playing alone. By 3, she studied modern dance. By 5, ballet. By 9, formal vocal training. And at 11 years old, she entered opera. 9 years of discipline followed. Breath control, posture, restraint. Her teachers understood quickly. This voice was not a novelty. It was dangerous in its beauty. They trained her across the entire instrument from low resonance to the very edge of human sound. That is where the whistle register emerged. Not as a trick, not as spectacle. It simply existed. By her teenage years, Minnie moved seamlessly between church choirs, school programs, and classical training. But something else began pulling at her. Soul music. Because soul did not just demand precision, it demanded honesty. At 14 years old, Minnie Riperton's life shifted. A blind pianist and producer named Renard Minor, working with Chess Records, heard her sing during a visit to Chicago high schools. He stopped everything, not because he heard perfection, but because he heard inevitability. That moment opened doors, but it also marked the beginning of a lifelong tension. A voice too advanced for the industry, a spirit too gentle for the machinery waiting ahead. Minnie Riperton's story is not about how high a human being can sing. It is about how gracefully someone can live, while knowing, long before the world does, that time is not on their side. Minnie Riperton did not enter music chasing discovery. She entered it already prepared. By the time most children were learning how to be heard, Minnie was learning how to disappear inside sound. Opera taught her that ego was a liability. That breath mattered more than volume. That control was not about power, but about restraint. For 9 years, she trained with the discipline of someone twice her age. Every note had a purpose. Every inhale was measured. Every phrase was shaped before it was released. This training did not make her famous. It made her precise. And precision, in the music industry, is rarely rewarded first. As a teenager, Minnie moved effortlessly between church choirs and classical instruction, between sacred music and formal technique. Her voice could rise without strain, fall without force, and hover in spaces most singers never reached. Yet even then, something felt misaligned. Opera offered structure, but not freedom. R&B offered emotion, but not discipline. Minnie carried both. That duality would become her gift and her burden. At 14, she was noticed by Renard Minor, a blind pianist and producer working with Chess Records. When he heard Minnie sing, he did not ask her to try again. He did not test her range. He already knew. She was brought into a girl group called The Gems. It was her first contract, her first step into the professional world. The promise was there. The results were not. The Gems recorded singles. They performed locally. They worked. But success never arrived. What did arrive was something far more formative. Chess Records used the group as background vocalists for its legendary roster. Etta James, Muddy Waters, Bo Diddley, Billy Stewart, The Dells. Night after night, Minnie stood just behind the spotlight. She watched legends work. She studied how songs were constructed, how emotion traveled through microphones, how power operated in studios long before it appeared on stage. At times, she filled in for Etta James on tour, not as a replacement, as a necessity. Those moments confirmed what many already felt, but few were ready to say aloud. Minnie Riperton did not belong behind anyone, but the industry was not built for voices like hers. As the group struggled, the imbalance became impossible to ignore. Minnie's voice was not just stronger, it was different. The Gems eventually dissolved. Chess Records made a quiet decision. They kept Minnie, not as a featured artist, not as a star, as a receptionist, a secretary. To outsiders, it looked like demotion. Inside the building, it was protection. They did not want to lose her. Under the guidance of A&R executive Billy Davis, Minnie recorded solo material under the name Andrea Davis. The records were released. They disappeared almost immediately. No radio push, no momentum. But inside Chess Records, her reputation grew. Musicians knew. Producers knew. The problem was never her ability. It was classification. She was too trained to be raw, too gentle to be loud, too complex to be simple. And in an industry that required easy labels, Minnie Riperton resisted definition. Then came the experiment that would finally give her space to breathe. Marshall Chess, son of the label's founder, envisioned something radical, an interracial group blending psychedelic rock, soul, jazz, orchestral sound, and black musical roots. He called it Rotary Connection. And for the first time, Minnie Riperton was not asked to fit inside a frame. She was asked to lead. It felt like freedom. It was also the beginning of a deeper misunderstanding. Because when the world finally heard Minnie without restraint, it would not know what to do with what it heard. And that confusion, between innovation and acceptance, between brilliance and marketability, would follow her into every chapter that came next. Rotary Connection did not change Minnie Riperton's life by making her famous. It changed her life by revealing the limits of the industry. For the first time, her voice was not restrained. It was allowed to expand, to bend, to drift between genres without asking permission. Rotary Connection was bold by design. Psychedelic soul, rock guitars, jazz, harmony, Classical arrangements layered over black musical tradition. And at the center of it all was Minnie's voice. Clear, weightless, uncontainable. Critics noticed immediately. They called the music ambitious, fearless, ahead of its time. They were right. The group toured with legends. They opened shows for bands that would later define an era. They shared stages with artists whose names would become permanent. Night after night, Minnie sang in rooms filled with awe. And still, something was missing. Commercial success never arrived. Radio didn't know where to place them. Record executives didn't know how to sell them. Audiences didn't know what category to expect. Too black for pop, too classical for soul, too soft for rock. The same voice that stunned musicians confused marketers. And beneath every polite rejection, another truth hovered quietly. Race. Executives would praise the records over the phone, then meet Minnie in person. And suddenly, enthusiasm cooled. Some said they didn't know how to market her. Others said her name didn't sound black enough. A few simply went silent. Rotary Connection became admired but unsupported, celebrated but unsustained. Eventually, Chess Records let them go. For Minnie, it felt like the ground disappeared beneath her feet. She had given the industry everything it claimed to value: originality, discipline, range, vision. And still, it did not know what to do with her. Around this time, she met someone who would alter the course of her life completely: Richard Rudolph. They met at a theater he was managing. No introduction needed. No performance required. It was recognition without negotiation. They fell in love quickly and openly. That alone made them a target. An interracial couple in the late 1960 seconds was still dangerous territory. Disapproval came from strangers, from institutions, even from family. But Minnie did not see color. She saw connection. They married. They wrote together. They planned a life that did not depend on approval. Still, doors kept closing. Landlords in Chicago refused to rent to them. Opportunities thinned. The pressure mounted. So Minnie made a choice that startled those who thought they understood her. She stepped away, not because she had failed, but because she refused to be crushed slowly. Minnie and Richard moved to Florida, away from the industry, away from expectations, away from constant explanation. For a time, Minnie Riperton was not a singer. She became a wife, a mother, a woman building a home instead of a career. Her daughter Maya was born. Life slowed. But talent does not vanish. It waits. Music stayed with her quietly, in melodies written at home, in harmonies sung without microphones, in a voice that did not need an audience to exist. Years passed. Then, unexpectedly, the industry came looking for her. A young record executive named Steve Fargnoli had spent years trying to find Minnie Riperton. He believed her voice had been lost not because it failed, but because it was never properly heard. When he finally tracked her down, he listened. Really listened. He took her demos back to Epic Records. Executives heard something undeniable. They flew to Florida. Minnie sung live. And in that moment, everything changed again. Epic Records did not ask her to reinvent herself. They asked her a different question. Who do you want to work with? Minnie did not hesitate. Stevie Wonder. Years earlier, Stevie had heard her sing and said she sounded like an angel. Now he was at the height of his power. Epic warned her he might be unavailable. They were wrong. Stevie was thrilled. He brought Minnie into the studio immediately. She sang background vocals for him. Then, he made a decision that would redefine her life. He would produce her album. For free. What followed was not a comeback. It was a correction. But the world would only hear the beauty of what came next, not the cost it had taken to get there. And waiting just beyond that long-delayed recognition was the truth Minnie Riperton was about to carry alone. When Minnie Riperton walked back into the studio, she did not sound like someone returning. She sounded like someone arriving exactly on time. There was no desperation in her voice, no hunger for validation. Only clarity. Stevie Wonder understood her immediately. He did not treat Minnie as a novelty. He did not ask her to prove her range. He did not build songs around spectacle. He framed her voice the way a master frames light, carefully, respectfully, allowing it to remain itself. Because of contractual restrictions, Stevie used a pseudonym, El Toro Negro, but the collaboration was unmistakable. The sessions moved effortlessly, guided by trust rather than control. Stevie did not restrain Minnie's voice. He gave it space. In 1974, the album Perfect Angel was completed. The title was not marketing, it was description. The record did not announce itself loudly. It unfolded. Strings moved gently. Rhythms breathed, and Minnie's voice floated above it all, not demanding attention but holding it. When Perfect Angel was released in August 1974, it began climbing the charts quietly. There was no shockwave, just inevitability. Then came the fourth single, Loving You. The song was not written for radio. It was not written to impress. It was written for comfort. Minnie had originally sung it to soothe her infant daughter when she cried. It was a lullaby before it was a hit. Soft, intimate, unprotected. Radio executives were hesitant. A song that delicate felt risky. A whistle register as the emotional center felt unconventional. Audiences disagreed. Loving You spread without force. From homes to cars. From bedrooms to radio towers. It reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. Platinum sales followed. Worldwide recognition arrived. Minnie Riperton's voice, once considered too complex to market, now belonged to millions. She appeared on television. She performed live. She smiled easily. But behind the ease, something else had begun. Even as success expanded outward, Minnie's body was quietly changing. During a routine moment, almost an afterthought, she mentioned a small lump in her breast to her husband, Richard Rudolph. At first, doctors were unconcerned. She was young, healthy, active. Further tests erased that comfort. Breast cancer, already advanced. The word metastasized landed heavier than the diagnosis itself. Doctors urged immediate surgery. A mastectomy followed without delay. Minnie did not hesitate. What came next was harder to absorb. The cancer had already spread to her lymph nodes. Privately, doctors gave her a prognosis few could accept. 6 months. Minnie Riperton was not yet 30. She did not collapse. She did not ask why. Her first thoughts were not about her career. They were about her children. Mark, Maya. That is where her courage anchored. Against the instincts of an industry trained on spectacle, Minnie made a decision that would quietly redefine her legacy. She chose honesty but not exposure. In 1976, she became one of the first major entertainers to publicly disclose a breast cancer diagnosis. She spoke calmly, without drama, without fear-mongering. But she kept one truth private. She never told the public or even most of her family that she had been given months to live. She did not want sympathy disguised as support. She did not want attention redirected from her work to her illness. She wanted people to listen to her music because they loved it, not because they felt sorry for her. Chemotherapy followed. The treatments were punishing. The side effects relentless. Nausea, fatigue, hair loss. To manage the pain, doctors recommended marijuana, a controversial suggestion at the time. It helped her eat, helped her rest, helped her remain present. Minnie refused to disappear. She did not wear wigs. She did not soften the truth. She did not retreat into silence. She continued living. She worked when she could, played tennis, laughed easily, held her children close. Friends later said Minnie never behaved like someone preparing to die. She behaved like someone refusing to waste time. While the world celebrated her voice, Minnie Riperton was learning how to live inside urgency without panic, how to protect joy even as her body weakened. The success the industry had delayed for years had finally arrived, and Minnie accepted it with grace. But the cost of that grace, and the quiet strength it required, was something she would continue to carry alone. Because even as her voice reached the world, the hardest part of her story was no longer behind her. After the diagnosis, time changed its shape. Days no longer stretched forward. They folded inward. Minnie Riperton did not mark her life in months or prognoses. She marked it in presence, in what could still be held, in what could still be given. Chemotherapy rearranged her body in ways no mirror could soften. Strength came and went without warning. Some mornings, she woke ready to move. Others, the weight of fatigue pinned her to the bed. But Minnie never performed suffering. She did not turn pain into spectacle. She did not rehearse despair for an audience. She refused the language of tragedy. Instead, she chose clarity. When she spoke publicly about breast cancer, she did so without fear in her voice, without trembling, without asking for anything in return. She talked about listening to your body, about not delaying care, about being honest without being consumed by fear. She never mentioned the prognosis, not the number, not the countdown. That silence was deliberate. Minnie Riperton did not want her children to grow up inside panic. She did not want her parents to carry a grief they could not prepare for. She did not want the public to hear her music through a filter of pity. She wanted love to remain love, music to remain music. And so, she kept living. She continued to work when her strength allowed. She recorded. She wrote. She showed up. In 1979, while working on her final album, Minnie, pain returned this time in her arm. Another tumor was found. The treatments intensified. The toll became undeniable. Still, she protected others from the truth. She called her parents often. Always upbeat. Always light. Her mother would later say she never knew her daughter was dying. That was Minnie's choice. Not denial. Protection. Friends noticed something unusual. Minnie did not behave like someone preparing to leave the world. She behaved like someone refusing to leave herself. She played tennis when her body allowed. She laughed easily. She stayed curious. She stayed kind. Even in pain, she was present. There was no bitterness in her voice. No anger directed at fate or fairness. Only focus. During this time, her quiet courage began to ripple outward. Women listened. Doctors noticed. Advocacy groups took note. At a moment when illness was still whispered about, especially among public figures, Minnie Riperton spoke without shame. Not loudly, not dramatically, simply truthfully. In recognition of that courage, President Jimmy Carter honored her with the American Cancer Society's Courage Award. It was not charity. It was acknowledgement, an understanding that strength does not always announce itself. Sometimes it steadies the room simply by standing in it. As her body weakened, Minnie's world grew smaller but more intentional. Her children were the center. Mark, Maya, she held them often, watched them closely, anchored herself in ordinary moments. She did not speak of legacy. She did not prepare speeches. She prepared memories. On the 12th of July, 1979, Minnie Riperton died in her husband Richard Rudolph's arms. It was 10 o'clock in the morning. A cassette player was nearby. A song Stevie Wonder had written just for her played softly. She was 31 years old. She lived nearly 3 years longer than doctors predicted. But numbers were never the measure. What mattered was how she filled the time she was given. There were no dramatic headlines that day. No chaos. No spectacle. Just absence. And in that absence, a strange quiet settled. The world did not yet know what it had lost. Not fully. Because Minnie Riperton's greatness was never designed to overwhelm, it was designed to endure. She did not leave behind a cautionary tale. She left behind a posture, a way of facing fear without surrender, a way of telling the truth without turning it into theater, a way of loving without demanding witness. Her voice had once floated beyond human limits, but in the end, it was her humanity, steady, generous, unafraid, that left the deepest mark. And the echo of that choice was only beginning to be heard. When Minnie Riperton died in July of 1979, the world responded gently, almost carefully. There were tributes. There were kind words. There was sadness. But there was not yet understanding. At the time, Minnie Riperton was still often reduced to a single idea: the woman who could sing very high, the whistle register, the 5-octave range, the angelic tone. It was admiration, but it was incomplete. History, however, has a way of slowing things down, of allowing meaning to surface only after noise fades. In the years following her death, the United States began to quietly reassess what Minnie Riperton truly represented. Not just a vocalist, but a cultural shift. Her decision to speak publicly about breast cancer came at a time when illness was hidden, especially among public figures. Strength was expected to look silent. Pain was expected to remain private, especially for women, especially for black women. Minnie broke that silence without turning it into spectacle. She did not dramatize her diagnosis. She did not brand her suffering. She did not ask the public to grieve with her in advance. She simply told the truth calmly, clearly, without apology. That choice mattered more than anyone realized at the time. Doctors later noted increased public attention toward early breast cancer screening. Advocacy organizations pointed to Minnie as one of the first artists who made vulnerability respectable. Not weak, not shameful, respectable. When President Jimmy Carter honored her with the American Cancer Society's Courage Award, it was not symbolic charity. It was acknowledgement of real social impact. Minnie Riperton had changed how illness could be spoken about. Not loudly, but honestly. Yet her deepest influence lived elsewhere. It lived in sound. In American music, Minnie Riperton expanded what the human voice was allowed to be. Before her, the highest registers were often treated as novelty. A trick, a flourish, a momentary spectacle. After Minnie, they became expressive tools. She proved that extreme range could carry emotion, not just astonishment. That softness could be intentional. That delicacy could be disciplined. Mariah Carey would later credit Minnie Riperton as a foundational influence, particularly in developing the whistle register as a serious expressive register rather than a gimmick. Whitney Houston admired her breath control and clarity. Stevie Wonder spoke of her voice as angelic, but also precise, intentional, and deeply musical. But Minnie's influence did not live only in famous names. Across the country, vocal teachers began using her recordings as study material, not to imitate her range, but to understand her control, her phrasing, her restraint, her ability to communicate intimacy without force. She taught singers that power does not always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives quietly and stays. Genres followed. In the 1,990 seconds, neo-soul artists like D'Angelo, Erykah Badu, Jill Scott, and others began operating inside emotional spaces. Minnie Riperton had helped open decades earlier, spaces where vulnerability was not rushed, where emotion could linger, where silence mattered. Albums like Adventures in Paradise, once overlooked, were re-examined as early blueprints for that movement. Music that did not chase hits, music that waited for listeners to arrive. Internationally, her reputation evolved even faster. In Europe and Japan, Minnie Riperton was respected not only as a pop singer, but as a technician. Her recordings were analyzed for breath placement, resonance, and tone production. She was studied, not sampled. Critics spoke of her not as a phenomenon, but as a musician. Back home, Chicago honored her in a way that reflected who she truly was. The Chicago Housing Authority renamed the Princeton Apartments in her honor the Minnie Riperton Apartments, placing her name permanently inside the community that raised her. Not a statue, not a museum, a living space, a place where people wake up, grow up, struggle, and survive. That mattered. Her children carried her legacy forward in their own language. Her daughter, Maya Rudolph, 6 years old when Minnie died, grew into one of America's most trusted comedic and acting voices, known for warmth, versatility, musical instinct, and emotional intelligence. Her son, Mark Rudolph, became a multi-instrumentalist and producer, fluent in sound the way his mother once was. Neither relied on nostalgia, neither leaned on myth. They embodied continuity. Perhaps Minnie Riperton's greatest contribution to American culture is this: she proved that softness could be strong, that brilliance did not require aggression, that a woman could command attention without demanding it. She never chased relevance, and because of that, relevance found her anyway. Her voice did not age. It settled. It became reference, comfort, study material. Her song Lovin You became one of the most covered songs in modern music, interpreted across genres, generations, and cultures. But none of those versions captured what Minnie gave naturally: innocence without weakness, intimacy without demand. She did not get decades to build mythology. She got moments, and she filled them completely. Some lives end loudly. Others end gently and echo forever. Minnie Riperton's voice still floats, somewhere above memory, above trend, above time. And for those who truly listen, she never really left. Some stories end with monuments. Others end with noise. Minnie Riperton's story ended with neither. It ended with a quiet that refused to disappear. After her death, the world did what it often does with women whose gentleness unsettles easy narratives. It simplified her. It softened the edges. It reduced a life of discipline, risk, and courage to a single, fragile image. The angelic voice. The high notes. The song that made people feel something sweet. But Minnie Riperton was never fragile. She was deliberate. She did not live loudly because she understood that loudness was not the same as power. She did not fight for space because she knew how to create it. She did not demand attention because she trusted presence more than insistence. That trust was earned. It was built in rehearsal rooms, in years of classical training, in studios where she stood just behind the spotlight and learned how music truly moves, in a body that carried both extraordinary sound and devastating illness at the same time. Minnie Riperton did not perform courage. She practiced it. She practiced it when she chose honesty without spectacle, when she protected her children from fear, when she shielded her parents from grief, when she allowed the public to know the truth, but not all of it. That restraint was not denial. It was authorship. She decided how her story would be told while she was still here, and she refused to let suffering become the headline. In a culture that rewards exposure, Minnie chose intention. That choice continues to matter, because her legacy is not a list of achievements. It is a way of moving through the world. She showed that vulnerability does not need to be raw to be real. That honesty does not require collapse. That softness, when disciplined, can carry extraordinary force. She also showed that talent alone is never the full story. Talent must survive systems that do not know how to protect it. It must navigate industries built for repetition, not rarity. It must endure misunderstanding without hardening into bitterness. Minnie Riperton did all of that, and still chose kindness. Her music reflects that choice. Even now, her recordings do not rush. They do not beg for relevance. They do not chase urgency. They wait. They invite listeners to slow down, to listen between the notes, to sit with feeling instead of consuming it. That is why her music continues to resonate in moments of quiet, late at night, in private spaces, in times when words feel unnecessary. Her influence does not announce itself with trends. It moves through breath, through pacing, through the courage to let silence exist. And silence, in Minnie Riperton's world, was never empty. It was full of choice. She chose love when fear would have been understandable. She chose truth when secrecy would have been easier. She chose music when explanation would have distracted. She chose to live fully inside the time she had, rather than preparing the world for her absence. That decision shaped everything that followed. Her children grew up carrying not a myth, but an example. Her listeners inherited not just songs, but permission to feel deeply without apology. Her peers and successors inherited a standard that could not be replicated by technique alone. Because Minnie Riperton's greatness was never only in her voice. It was in her balance, between discipline and freedom, between visibility and privacy, between expression and restraint. That balance is rare, and it cannot be taught easily. It must be lived. Minnie Riperton did not get decades to refine her legacy. She did not have time to reintroduce herself to each generation. She did not control how the industry would remember her, but she controlled how she moved through her life, and that control left a deeper mark than any headline ever could. Some people leave behind answers. Others leave behind questions. Minnie Riperton left behind a feeling that gentleness can be strong, that honesty can be calm, that love does not have to shout to be heard. Her voice still floats, not above humanity, but within it, in breath, in patience, in the quiet confidence of people who know who they are. She did not ask the world to understand her. She trusted it would catch up, and slowly, without noise, without spectacle, it has.